VPJ Arponen, the designer of All Bridges Burning, the 10th volume of the Coin series, has designed a game that looks at the political, military, and economic maneuvering of the superpowers of the 21st century, called Order and Opportunity. We are pleased and honored to have him join us here today to give us a look at this interesting upcoming game on Legendary Tactics. We are joined today by Vez Arponen, and he is in the midst of getting a new game out called Order and Opportunity. And it is a really, really interesting game. I've had a little bit of an introduction to it, reading the rules and moving some pieces around on a vassal module. But I'm really glad to hear directly from you and to hear about your new upcoming game. So thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, yeah, thank you. Thanks for the invite. It's really, really great. I've been an admirer of your channel for a while now. You do great stuff, so great to be here.
No, thank you so much. So, tell us maybe a little bit about you and this game.
Yeah, so I suppose just very briefly on a personal background. So I come from Finland originally. That's where the accent that you probably pick up. Mm-hmm. And I've been living for a decade now in Germany, working and living, got my wife and two children, my family here, and like for many of us, game design and playing games is essentially a hobby, right? Doing it on the side. So the Coin series, Volume 10, All Bridges Burning, was my first design published by GMT Games. I think 2019. I think the game came out. These processes are so long that you lose
yeah.
track at some point. When did it exactly come about? I think it was right
officially 2020.
2020. Okay, good. So so that's my first design, and now basically ever since I've been working on my second game. And as we do this on a hobby basis, then sometimes it takes a little longer. So here we are at 2024, and but the game is on the P500 list, has been for about a year now, and we are making progress towards the magical, well, some say it's a P500, 500 pre-orders. Well, we passed that, but the real number, and I don't think this is a secret, this has been mentioned in a couple of interviews by people from the GMT. So the real number is somewhere around 700, I think, before GMT starts considering, actually producing the game. So we are a couple of games pre-orders away from that still.
Yeah, no, but that's it's a big accomplishment, because especially as a newer designer, there's some designers that automatically command that 700 plus orders. So, but the fact that you're getting close is a really great thing. So tell us a bit about this game and its Order and Opportunity. Where did the name come from, even? Because that's an interesting name.
Yeah, so the full title is Order and Opportunity, Making of the Post-Cold War World Order, right? So it deals with the post-Cold War period. The game starts around year 2000. It's for 4 players, so there are 4 player sides in the game: the United States, European Union, China, and Russia. Those are the 4 sides. The game does, however, come with a solar system, so you can play it on your own. You can play it. There's going to be a 2 and a 3 player system in there as well, so you can mix and match the player counts, and we've tested all those systems as well. So they do work, and so the game is really about economic, political, and military influence, and we can sort of maybe get into what the game is about if we think about in terms of the title, right? So the title has got 2 words, right? Order and Opportunity. So order refers to this idea of the so-called liberal rules-based world order. As it's often said, the West or democracy won the war of ideas of the Cold War period, right? And this was then supposed to form the basis of this, liberal rules-based world order in the post-Cold War period. And then there was for a moment this idea that, as the famous phrase goes, it was the end of history, and we were supposed to enter this kind of era of democracy, free trade, prosperity. And so when we think about the Cold War, the post-Cold War period, then there's that idea of order and that sort of a new era of peace and prosperity starting. And then on the other hand, if we think about the post-Cold War period from the perspective of the other second word in the title, which is opportunity, then this refers, in my mind, to this idea of short-sighted economic, political, and military opportunism that I think many also associate with the post-Cold War period. So, economic opportunism, we think about things like the economic globalization and how it has produced winners, but also plenty of losers. And we are dealing with this today in the form of populism. Political populism today seems to draw at least part of its political power from that sort of winners losers situation. And then on the other hand, also opportunity refers to this sort of military opportunism, military adventures, US-led interventions in which the Europeans certainly have played their part as well, and how there's this idea that these sort of interventions, although they may have been engaged in for good reasons or with good aims in mind, they've nonetheless eroded the idea of a concept of order. There have been these kind of feelings of unilateral actions by the democracy. So there's really that tension between order and opportunity in these various thematic dimensions that sort of lies at the heart of the game.
So how did you come up with this idea? How did you figure, okay, I'm gonna put a game together of the last 25 years or so, or 30 years, and I'm gonna turn it into a game and have systems and mechanics and so forth. How did you come up with that idea?
Yeah, I think it really started for me from the experience of the rise of political populism, contemporary forms of populism, and sort of this more broadly in Western societies, probably in the US and Canada and elsewhere, Europe as well. There's been sort of this period of soul searching, like how did we get here? Why are our societies polarizing in certain ways? Why are some people so unhappy with what we seem to have, achieved in our societies? And for many of us, these also had sort of personal dimensions. New divisions emerged within families and that sort of thing. So that was really the origin, and that's how I got to thinking about this whole question of post Cold War. What is this period really all about? And then these themes that I just talked about began to come together, and I sort of developed a thesis from there. So it was really sort of personal experience where it started. It's kind of funny because as I've been working on this game, I realized that I can't really design a game that is not somehow that doesn't have a personal connection, right? So with my first game, All Bridges Burning, it was about the Finnish history, right? So obviously a personal connection there. Also, by the way, the concept of polarization played a central role in the Finnish Civil War, as that's the period that the game covers. And then, then we move to the game Order and Opportunity, and first you might think, well, that can't be a personal thing because we are talking about a huge, big, global scale, thematic setting. But for me, it's a very personal game actually, because it has to do with that, as I explained, with that sort of soul searching. What's gone wrong? What's going on here?
And what were there some games that influenced this one that you can specifically think of?
Yeah. So. In terms of influences, so the development process of this game has been really quite long. So when my first game came out, already before it was officially published, I had sort of moved on to the next project, and so we are looking at, what is it now, 5-6 years of kind of working on this game on and off. There were more intensive periods and less so, and so over that period, loads and loads of games, of course, got onto the table and I was engaged with, and then they faded away and others came. But I mean, if we think about, sort of CDGs, the card-driven game, which Order and Opportunity also mechanically really is. then there are certain classics, and at the same time, of course, GMT Games as the publisher, the target publisher for this game, they are known for the CDG systems, right?
Yes.
And so games like Labyrinth,
Mhm.
War on Terror, are really sort of on a fundamental way, I think, influenced. And I remember there were these periods in development where I was kind of playing those what was my prototype back then, and then Labyrinth kind of on parallel, switching between the I don't know the Vassal windows and sort of feel
Yes.
like just to get a feel like why does mostly it was like why does Labyrinth feel so good and my game is so crap, but I do remember at one point being and doing that, and Twilight Struggle as well, obviously another global scale CDG. But really, from the beginning, also one thing that I've talked about in other connections is this thing that so if you think about games like Labyrinth, and I know you guys have done
Mhm.
great entertaining playthroughs of the game as well. You've got Labyrinth and then Twilight Struggle and a couple of others. Those CDGs, they often tend to be 2-player games, right? And but Order and Operative is a 4-player game, so there was already the first like, how do I make sense of the CDG system in a 4-player game setting? There's an interesting thing interesting wall almost I felt like I ran into, which has to do with it's essentially a fairly cut and dry mechanical issue, but it's about the amount of information. So if you imagine a classic 2-player CDG, you've got 2 hands of cards, so 50% of the information of what's going to happen during the opponent's turn is unknown to you because you don't know their hand of cards. But if you imagine a 4-player game, right, so suddenly you have 3 other hands of hidden information that are going to impact the board state in a way that any single player has no control over, no knowledge of.
Yeah.
Right. This put immediately a kind of like, as much as there was this influence relationship to Labyrinth and Twilight Struggle, this put a break and sort of create a break between in that relationship, and I had to kind of think and rethink certain aspects and redesign often also parts of Order and Opportunity to kind of really get to the heart of what it is to make a CDG, a card-driven game in some ways, for 4 players. And so from there, I got to other games that entered my table, like Root. So Root is, I mean, you wouldn't necessarily say it's a card-driven game in the classical GMT sense, although, I mean, even poker is a card-driven game if you take it literally.
Yes.
You use cards to do things, and then something like Weimar, the Matthias Kramer
Yes.
game that just came out. I know you've had an interview also with Matthias,
Yes, I have. Yeah. Yeah.
and
And I
so
saw
those
that
kind of,
game, but I haven't played it.
yeah, same here. I've got the big box right there in the shelf, but still waiting for other 3 enthusiasts to come together. And so so those were then the games where I sort of also where I ended up somewhere during the process to sort of try to figure out how to do a CDG for more than 2 players. So that's sort of the mechanical side. And then, if we think about the sort of the gameplay dynamics and theme side of this question of, what has influenced me, then I do have to mention the Coin series, right? So Coin series is in many ways for me home, original home in gaming in many more senses than one. So my first design was a Coin series game, right? So I come from that background in terms of the design craft, and then the Coin series was really also the series through which I entered the hobby as well. So I remember having played some Euro games and that sort of thing, but really was the Coin series that got me into the more serious historical, if you like, simulation games. So Coin series had that role, and I think there's one even a slightly deeper aspect about the Coin series that I think I have carried forward with me in my later designs, and I think also kind of spoke to me from the very beginning. So if you think about sort of Coin series games like Fire in the Lake or A Distant Plane, and especially if you think about the so-called counter-insurgent factions in there. So there's often this kind of gameplay dynamic there that has to do with those factions sort of going into places, be it Vietnam, be it Afghanistan, and so trying to do bring about, like trying to do state building, for instance, and they engage in this sort of hearts and minds operations, and they have to engage in military operations as well. And often in these games and in these historical situations as well that the games are about, there's this sort of trade-off between like trying to do something constructive and good, but sort of end up tearing things up more than you can actually fix, right? This is very, for me at least, this was the thing about the coin series, like the United States going into Vietnam and sort of ending into this kind of military conflicts that generate more opposition than they seem to be able to generate support. So that's sort of the classic coin thing for me. I mean, certainly you can identify many other aspects in the coin series, but that was really the thing that got me hooked, right? And that's also at the heart of All Bridges Burning, and it's kind of in some ways also in order and opportunity.
Yeah, what I saw, as I said, I didn't have a chance to play it yet, but I see that element of having four different factions, and sometimes you got to work together. Most times you're working in your own self-interest, but sometimes you got to cut deals and make things happen, like the lifting of the block for the legacy point mechanic, which we'll probably get into. There's a lot of that going on that leaves the room open for negotiation. And that's what I think really makes those games shine, is where it's all the deal cutting and all the back and forth, the diplomacy actually brings that game even more to life. Even if the mechanics are great, it just elevates at another level.
Yeah, I think that's sort of the area, this sort of negotiation and sort of like a game sort of going between like four players all against each other, and then sort of occasionally forming these blocks, and it becomes almost like a team game at the same time. I think this is something that the coin series certainly has brought into, or like made really so central to the historical games hobby. And then of course games like Root may have aspects of this, this kind of negotiations going from 4 against 4 into 2 against 2, and this is certainly also the aim in Order and Opportunity as well. We've got on one hand the 4-player setup with the US, EU, China, and Russia, but then what they share in common is what the game calls the governance type. So you've got the US and the EU, which are democracies, and then you've got Russia and China as authoritarian states in the game, and they are contexts and aspects of the scoring in the game where these two teams kind of begin to play sort of together and have certain shared goals, right? And this is also, by the way, the basis for the 2-player variant, and also in part the 3-player variant in the game. So it's kind of nice thing to have, and it helps with these variants in particular.
Yeah. So let's take a look at the Vassal version here.
So so here you're looking at the game board. I mean, first of all, the usual reminder: this is very much non-final art by yours truly, and you can certainly see that in the graphic design. So this being a GMT Games game at some point, then you can rest assured that the final product will look very nice. We know that from GMT Games, so they make good stuff. But so this is just my vision of how the graphics could perhaps at least functionally look like, even if the color schemes and such are really quite not very all that professional. So let's just sort of, so first of all, this is a view in the middle of a solo game that I'm playing, and this is a test game that I'm running. I'm playing the US and the EU against Russia and China. So US would be the blue pieces. The green pieces, EU the blue pieces, China yellow, and Russia red. And so what you are looking at here is the map, and the map is divided. If I can draw with my mouse, hopefully this is visible on the video. So the map is divided into theaters. So here, for instance, is Europe, and then you've got Asia, and you've got the Americas together, and Africa, and the Middle East. So it's 5 theaters. So each theater is such as Asia over here, is divided into a number of spaces. So we've got Central Asia. So we're talking on sort of regional scale here. We are not going down to individual countries, but this is kind of regional scale. So we've got Central Asia, we've got South Asia, Asia Pacific, and then China has its own space here. So China is one of the player sides and also appears as a home space, so-called home space here on the map. And then if we think about each individual space, then it's got the influence track here, 4 spaces, and these would be then the wooden pieces that you move here to show the level of influence. So there is that. Mechanically also, maybe just one more detail, we've got different types of influence here. So if you think about classic CDGs like Twilight Struggle, which has got only one generic type of influence, this game differentiates between economic, which is the triangular shape, political, which is the octagonal shape, and then finally military influence, which is the cube.
Yeah, I really like that, how it has the different types of influence, because it just adds another level of detail to the game. It's not
Yeah, and like it's on one hand it's kind of another detail, and I would argue it's a thematically necessary detail, in the sense that if we think about the Cold War, post-Cold War period, we have got powers such as the EU, which is predominantly an economic power, right? So the EU doesn't have its own army really in any sense, so it's not a military power in that sense. It's got a military industry, so it's got something like a military power, but really it's very distinct from a traditional military power such as the United States, right? And then China also more of an economic power rather than some sort of military power, although that sort of avenues must be considered in the game as well, obviously.
And is that how you handle the asymmetry? Is that you have different amounts of economic strength or political strength or military strength? Is that the main way that you differentiate between the different powers?
Yeah, so already with All Bridges Burning, I had sort of like a complicated, let's put it like this, relationship to asymmetry, right? So if we think about what's around there in historical and other sort of more serious games, we've got games like, well, the coin series, obviously, and these are highly asymmetric in that you've got different sides with different action menus. Their action menus often look almost nothing like the action menu of the next player, right? So, and whereas in All Bridges Burning and here also, the action menus are actually identical. So where does the asymmetry come from? That's quite a good question. I've tried to tease out the asymmetry in the geographic starting positions. That actually has a surprising effect on how much asymmetry results right from there. But then the other aspect really is the cards. So the cards are sort of like one aspect of asymmetry here. So each power in the game has its own deck, right? And the starting so the total number of cards is 20, and the suits of the cards. So I will talk about that soon. There's actually identical distribution, but the starting makeup of the different hands in the game are different. So for instance, the United States starts fairly strong with military, the military suit, which is the shield icon you can see here on the cards. And then there's the economic suit. There, the European Union, for instance, is quite strong in the economic suit, and as is China, and then Russia is kind of a mix different between different. So this is part of the asymmetry of the game, and then if we think about the game, also sorry, start that again. If we think about the card effects, then there's some symmetry there in that when you get to know the cards, you will see that the same card effects occur across the different decks. But at the same time, the exact mix of what suit, what card effect, those are different from the deck. So the decks are kind of asymmetric, and that creates the asymmetry really in the game. Also, one aspect that needs to be mentioned here is that there's a light deck building element to this game. So if you think about games like Dune Imperium, There's a small like aspect of deck building there as well, isn't it? Right? I mean, it's been a while that I played the game.
Yes, yeah. Well, you buy
So
your cards at the end of your turn with the unused
indeed,
influence points.
indeed. So there's a similar thing here, that players have an opportunity of essentially, as the jargon goes, building their deck as the game goes. They can get new cards, they can shed cards. So there's a way of going from a military heavy deck, say, to a politics heavy deck, or to cultural suit heavy deck. So you've got that sort of tactical and strategic possibility there.
I'm interested to hear about the suit mechanic as well and how that plays in.
Yeah, so let me see what might be the best way of going about this. I don't want to go in too much detail so that people aren't overwhelmed by the detail. So maybe I just talk about how does a game turn look like. So for instance, if we say it's the US turn right now in the game, and the US player has got this hand of cards here. So this would be, you're looking at 5 cards here. The 3 first cards are military suit cards with the shield icon. Then there's 1 economic suit card with the factory icon, and then the last one, the United Nations, is a cultural suit card. And now the first thing as a player at the start of your turn, you nominate a suit. So you say, in this case, the United States might say, I'm going to play the military suit, and then you can go and reveal as many of those military suit cards as you like.
Yeah, that's interesting. Thematically, what does that represent?
Well, it really represents this idea that, as an administration, you kind of have this kind of set of possible tools in your hand or in your deck, whether it's in your hand or in your draw deck. You have these tools, but whether it's always the opportune moment to bring those tools to bear, and whether the moment is opportune in the world out there, is a different question. So I wanted each side to have their own deck, really, rather than drawing from a shared deck. That approach you can see sometimes in other multiplayer CDGs. I went ultimately with the personal, asymmetric decks, and they really represent, on one hand, historical phenomena. Like here in the US hand, you can see the neocons. It's the Bush administration, and the kind of broader political orientation, and the kind of military heavy side that many associate with the neocons and the sort of the immediate 9/11 period. You've got also things like the Intelligence Reform and Terrorism Prevention Act, which was the U.S. reaction to 9/11 and an attempt to improve the interagency counterterrorism abilities of the United States. You've got things like the unipolar moment, which is the phrase often used to sort of describe the post-Cold War U.S. sort of domination, and so it's a mix of historical things like some sort of Gokres laws and such, and then sort of phenomena like the neoconservatism. And so the US has here then nominated the suit, and that they proceed to reveal these cards, and then soon use them to take actions or to trigger event effects. First thing, though, and this goes back to the theme of the game, which is the idea that, as I was explaining earlier, that on one hand there's this kind of idea of a post-Cold War liberal rules-based world order, and then on the other hand this idea that when global powers, great powers, aspiring superpowers act on the global stage, they often kind of end up perhaps breaking more than they can fix. So and how this comes into the game is by way of the consequence mechanic. So that means here the US has nominated the military suit, and the consequence for the military suit is a particular one. And for this we move here down to the world order track. This is the track over here, 5 spaces with each power having their own marker here on the track. So nominating the military suits, or representing some of this unilateral military action, the world order contribution of the power must be drawn one level down. So this represents really the effects of unilateral military action and this sort of power projection on the idea of rules-based world order. And so in this case, well, the United States is already, in my ongoing game, has already hit the, so to speak, the rock bottom of the track of level 1. In this particular case, they would actually, well, attempt to worsen their standing there. It doesn't work because it's already at 1, so they would have to pay a resource instead. So there's that sort of, it's called the moral leadership penalty. So if you are failing as a democracy in particular to uphold the rules-based world order that you are historically following the Cold War period, so they're supposed to uphold. If you fail in that, then there's a certain period, a certain penalty, And conversely, for the Russians and the Chinese, who are also not doing very well here in this ongoing game, they have to pay the penalty, but only if both of the democracies are upholding the standards on a sufficient level. So if this was the situation and the Chinese would engage in excessive military action, then they would have to pay the penalty. But in my ongoing game, the US is failing in this, so the authoritarians don't have to pay the penalty. So this is one of the ways of trying to tease out these post-Cold War implications in the game form, in the mechanics. What does it mean to talk about a rules-based world order, and what does it mean to unravel it through your own actions, such as military activities? So going back to the US hand, so the turn would then normally proceed by the US simply starting to use each one of these cards, and this is where the classic sort of, or fairly classic CDG element comes into. So a card you can use, like often in the CDG games, for two different things. So on one hand, you can use it for an action or an operation, as often called in the CDGs, or for an event effect. So it is here also, except that these cards, as you've probably already noticed, they don't have any operations points on them. They have rather the suits. So here the mechanic is after all very similar. For each suit, there's a menu of actions that corresponds to that suit. So for instance, with the military suit, the United States could now go down here into Asia Pacific and increase their military influence by 1. So that's one of the military actions. The other action they could take is what is called in the game contesting. So this is essentially, if you like, the battle mechanic of the game, whereby you remove an opposing influence in a space. So if we did it here in the South Asia, then, for instance, the Chinese political influence could be now targeted by the military action there, so representing in this case not military action as such, but sort of aggressive influence operation of some kind. And so if that happens, then in South Asia, a tension marker would appear in the space. And this is an important effect, again, of the thematic idea that you can unravel rules-based world order and cause sort of instability, tension in spaces when you engage in that sort of activity. So in this case, okay, the Chinese influence has been removed, but tension has appeared in the space. The tension mechanic then relates to the concept of war of ideas in the game. So earlier I mentioned that there's a team play element here, democracy versus authoritarianism, and how this is played out in the game mechanics is on the one hand by the tension markers. So if tension increases later on in the game to 2, and then we get the so-called war of ideas check card. We can talk about that a little bit later. Then in this particular case, the South Asian space would actually shift from a neutral governance level, so the yellow printed marker, to this authoritarian governance type. And this in turn, if we travel over here to the War of Ideas track over here, would shift the War of Ideas track towards the authoritarian end of the track. So this is the the lock symbol is the authoritarian end, and here is the democratic end. And so in my ongoing game, the marker here has already shifted from the center, which is here, one level, and now it would shift another level. And you can see here the yellow icon, which is the victory point icon. So if this happens, then in this case, the authoritarians would collectively earn one victory point. Of course, it's possible for the democracies to encourage democracy as the dominant form of governance around the world, and then they would earn victory points collectively as shown on the track. So this is the team play aspect that relates directly to the use of military force and how that sort of world order breaking activity really encourages tension and ultimately prepares ground for authoritarian forms of governance taking over around the world, as has been the sort of the tendency, sadly, in the post-Cold War period.
Is there an element where if China or Russia does more of a military, projects their military strength, that actually pushes the region more towards democracy? Because is that kind of how that balances?
No. So the game is so that was a consideration at some point during development, but given how certain, rather sort of boring mechanical considerations about gameplay dynamics and so on, and the length of the play and so on, so I ended up tweaking the game such that it's really in a way an asymmetric struggle here. So there's a natural inbuilt tendency in the game for tension to increase. So for me, this was just a historical fact about the post-Cold War period as we've experienced it, especially since the 2000s. And so it's really there's that tendency built into the game in various mechanics and card effects and such. And then it's sort of the job of the democracies to try to stop the tide, and so it's really, in this game, it's the job of the democracies.
Interesting. Okay.
And if we continue the US turn, so the US would then proceed to simply use their cards for either for the suit and the corresponding action. I've talked about that in the military context, or then make use of various event effects. So this is classic CDG stuff, right?
Yes.
So here on the unipolar moment card, for instance, there's an event effect: add resources according to your or NATO military influence track. So basically, you can play this card to increase the US resource cylinder here a certain number of steps, depending a little bit on what's the status on your military influence track at that moment. So there's that one, perhaps an aspect that is kind of mechanically, well, I wouldn't go as far as to say that it's novel, but it's certainly something that you don't see so much, at least in the CDG space, is the concept of reaction abilities. So if we take here the neocons card, you can see there's the suit there, so it can be used for military action. And then the event effect associated here is the place reaction event effect. So, okay, sounds boring. Okay, but what it does is it actually turns the card sideways. So place reaction involves the card being turned sideways, which activates then So turning the card sideways actually activates the reaction ability part of the card. So in this case, thematically, the reaction ability is called Powell at the UN. So you will remember how the neocons sent Colin Powell to the UN to make the case for the intervention in Iraq about weapons of mass destruction and so on. So there are small historical beats here for people to pick up. And so so what happens when this card has been turned sideways is it activates the reaction ability, and at that point the card leaves the hand and it's placed onto the map. Let me just see where there's a free slot. I'm quite far along in the game, so there actually not too many free slots. I'm just gonna make some space up there.
Yeah.
Apologies for this. So when the game is played for the reaction ability, it's placed along the top of the map in one of those three, they're called horizon event slots. So essentially, well, the US has already during a previous turn placed one card there. Let's just make room for for this one. So this card would go up here, and from here on, the reaction ability is in effect. So the card says if an economic or military action is played by somebody in the theater in which the card has been placed, in this case it has been placed in Asia, then the US may react in a certain way. So this particular reaction ability allows the US to increase its military influence, or then to contest, which were the two actions I just briefly ran down there. So essentially what this does is, so earlier I explained about how CDGs are often two-player CDGs, and there you have the information situation that you know much more about where the game is headed than in a four-player setting. And then the other aspect of this is that in a two-player CDG, you can react almost immediately to other people's plays because it's I go, you go structure, right? But in a four-player game, it's I go, then them, them. So you have a lot more downtime. So the reaction abilities was a way of fighting that, to have players a chance to react to actions happening outside of their own turn. And so this was the original motivation for bringing the reaction abilities into the game. And but they also give rise to quite an interesting and intricate sort of tactical and a strategic dimension as well. Because if you really carefully think about your reaction abilities, and if you think about what's going on here in the regions on the map, so for instance, for instance, here in the Middle East, there's the ISIS world event card. I will talk about those a little bit later. With carefully placed reaction abilities, you could actually maneuver yourself pretty quickly into a nice position of doing something about the world events. So actually getting the right reaction abilities in place is quite a essential part of how to play the game well. So that was sort of two problem solved at once, introducing a sense in which players can react outside of their own turn, so reducing downtime in some ways, and then on the other hand, at the same time, creating this kind of a tactical and a strategic dimension as well around those reactions.
Yeah, it's very clever because you can kind of plan around maybe setting up reaction cards everywhere, and then you've got the ability to quickly respond to any crises or anything that needs doing. You have an opportunity to step in immediately. That's neat.
Yeah, it's interesting, and that's exactly how it works. So like, if at this moment that I'm playing the non-player side, so this is a solo game, dominating the Levant here and dominating also the ISIS world event card. There are no US and EU pieces to be seen, and if I was to place any into the space, then the Russians have their strategically placed reaction ability. They have some special forces in place in there, and they can immediately react, in this case by probably contesting the influence that has just been placed. So in effect, Russia has just kind of sealed off Levant here for any intervention from others. They still have plenty to do here in terms of fighting ISIS themselves, but at least the space is kind of sealed off from US and EU interventions by virtue of the reaction ability. So this is quite a striking illustration of how these things can work.
Great.
So the reaction ability really is one aspect that I think kind of stands out mechanically if we think about the CDG formula. I can't think of from the top of my head that there is anything similar in any of the CDGs. Earlier I mentioned Matthias Kramer's Weimar. There is actually a reaction mechanic, interestingly, in there. It involves, I believe, reserving points and then using them later on to react spontaneously in certain ways to other players. So it's a different mechanic, but it's I can see that I would guess that Matthias had a little bit of a similar problem there. How do I keep people focused and involved in the game outside of their own turns? Well, yes. Reactions. Let's introduce reactions. So
especially this often seems like a game where analysis paralysis could be an issue because there's just so many options. Maybe the rules aren't overwhelming, but there's so many options as to, do I place political influence here or economic influence there, or do I, so.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that was one of the issues that I was dealing with, because when you have a game with a global scope, then and you look at, even just in this case, like, I don't know, 20 years of history, it's still a long period of time, relatively speaking, and there's lots going on, and you want to introduce this, and what about that? That should also be in the game. So, and I think on one hand also that can be part of a good thing about a game like this, because you really want the world appear to you as this, like when you're the U.S. administration, the world is a complicated place, right? There's loads going on. There's Gaddafi here. There's ISIS there. There's lots of things going on there, right? There's national debt increasing. All sorts of different influences come together. I think we have to think about other games in this area like Mr. President from GMT Games, and I know you've done playthroughs on this as well. It's also kind of a similar thing. There's so much going on, and you kind of have to prioritize, and kind of also at the same time hope that things go okay while I'm looking away. So I think that's sort of part of the path or the course for a global scale game like that. So I'm not really shying away from it.
Nice. And so, how do you feel the mechanics reflect the historical events? Like, now that you've obviously played, tested this many, many times, do you feel like you get a sense of the history that it gives you? It may not be able to follow the exact path of history, but it gives you at least a sense of the priorities of each of these superpowers, and that it comes
Yes.
across in the game.
Yeah, so my approach has been informed. My approach in this game has been informed by certain sort of, also a certain engagement with, games, game studies, with sort of theoretical literature about games, what makes them unique in comparison to other media, and so on. And often when we in the board game space, when we talk about games with let's call it a simulation value, or sort of historical approach, or thematic focus upon some historical setting, for instance, then we often think about, well, there need to be events that evoke the period. So there needs to be Powell at the UN. There needs to be the neoconservatives need to be there. Angela Merkel from Germany and the EU needs to be in there. More of a Gaddafi in Africa needs to be there, and or then we think in terms of actions that are named in particular ways. So there needs to be military action, there needs to be political action, and so on. And we think perhaps about flavor texts. We think about companion books, playbooks, as GMT calls them, with plenty of historical information as to what's going on in the period. So that's one way of thinking about theme and what it is to sort of experience history through games. And then there's the other, I wouldn't say it's in some ways a contrasting approach, and at the same time it's kind of a complementary approach. And this really comes to me originally actually from Volker Runke, the coin series, founder of the coin series. There are some of these interviews in which he talks about this, and so his idea is that what games do perhaps the best is put people in the shoes of the historical actors, and in particular in the shoes, in the sense of what are the decision points, what are the challenges, what are the opportunities, what are the dangers, what are the difficulties that these people were struggling with. So it's kind of like a simulation of the decision space, more than that this particular historical event or this action has to be there. It's more about putting people in a certain decision space, right? So, and this has been sort of my approach in this game as well, and it goes back to these other aspects that I talked about, such as when you engage in excessive military action, then there are consequences in terms of worsening world order. That's a decision space issue, right? So it's about what should I do? What can I do? What are the dangers? What are the trade-offs? So my idea has been to sort of simulate from that agency point of view. It's a topic in game studies about games as a medium, as in comparison to films and books. Games are a medium characterized by the player agency, right? So you make decisions, you steer the course of the game. Whereas a book is something you simply take in your hand and you read a story how it was written down, right? You don't change the course of the story while you're playing. And the same thing with when you're reading. And the same thing with film. You take it in. Certainly, there's a whole richness that is to be taken in from there. But as media, games are actually different. Games are all about, I would say, about agency, about being in these decision-making positions. And I think this is an opportunity for games to tell stories, right? Tell the story of, oh, that decision was so difficult. I could see that those were the dangers, but I made the decision anyway, and it went like this, or it went like that. A good outcome, bad outcome. So this is the stuff that I think games are made of, and this kind of agency and creating decision-making points is essential to it.
Yeah. And how did you find the balance between making a simulation and making a game? And did you have a preference one way or the other, or how did you strike that balance?
Yeah, so this is the classic thing. So so I find that this kind of goes in cycles when you're designing games. So you come in with certain ideas about the historical setting, and you want this aspect to be in there and that aspect, and then you design and then you create these systems and mechanics, and then you then it's time to take that game out there and test it and play it by yourself or with others, and then you realize there's too much in here. Let's shave.
Yes.
Let's take that out. Let's reduce this into that. Let's just work on what we've got. And it's this kind of constant back and forth, like constantly adding a little bit, cutting down, and that's I suppose the ultimate skill in design to make something accessible and at the same time somehow rich. How I think about it in this game is so. I feel like saying that the basic mechanical engine is actually very simple, and it's used the same way in different contexts. So, for instance, earlier I talked about the influence tracks in spaces. So just playing a card and using it for a suit allows you to move a piece up or down on the influence track. This is a very basic mechanic that repeats itself whether it's the economic context, whether it's the military context, or whether it's the context of resolving these so-called world events. So
those are events that everyone has to maybe get together and solve potentially, or it's certainly easier to solve if you have more of the other players on board.
Yeah, so maybe this is a good place to talk a little bit about the world events. So these are really quite key aspects of the game. So the first entry point to the world events is, well, what do they represent thematically? Well, they represent world events, things, crises, wars that are happening around the world. So we might have ISIS here in the Middle East. We might have a famine here in North Africa. Or we might have China having just taken over Hong Kong from Britain, and then there's a political situation there. So these are world events, and the world events are mechanically just simply resolved by getting a certain level of influence in place in the space with the world event card.
Crisis, yeah.
So, for instance, if I move some of the markers here out of the way to get a clearer view of this. So, for instance, here the Russians could now seek to add more political influence into Levant, where the ISIS world event is. Plenty of icons on those cards. I know, and I'm not going to talk through them in detail here. But basically, important is the very bottom of the card against the green background. Perhaps you can just see, and this shows the piece type. So you can resolve this with a military influence, the black cube. If you have 2 levels of military influence in the space, you will get 2 victory points, and you will get the bonus of regime change. So RC icon next to it. So, I mean, the thematic idea there is, I guess, fairly obvious. If you engage in military activity, then regime change should be an option in the context of many of these world events. Famine, not. You cannot address a famine with military influence most of the time. So that will be different. And there's a whole host of different type of world events here in the game. And so it's tempting to go in with military influence here because the rewards are high. You will get 2 victory points. You will get a regime change which works in your favor on the War of Ideas track that we covered earlier. On the other hand, military influence is associated, when you bring it onto the map, it's associated with the consequence of worsening your world order contribution. So you might hit into those penalty levels there. And so in some contexts, you might think, well, it's better to seek a softer approach, political, so which is the octagonal piece, or economic. These you will see here give you just 1 victory point, which is immediately a lot less attractive. But as compensation, it gives you 1.5 LP. So this is the legacy points that I think you mentioned earlier.
And that was kind of a neat mechanic where you could, if you had more influence than the other player, they could not use their power there, but you had the option of lifting it, unblocking, I guess is the term you used, and allowing them to do what they have to do. But you also get legacy points, which can be converted into victory points. So it's kind of creates some bargaining mechanics there that I thought could potentially be very interesting.
Yeah, that's the attempt. And so indeed, so how that would mechanically work is if we consider that this would be the situation here, China and Russia tie in terms of resolving the ISIS world event here. So by virtue of the tie, they block each other, but China could say to Russians, or conversely, the other way around, well, I will lift my block and allow you to resolve the world event for the benefits listed if you give me in exchange a so-called legacy point. So this is a currency that can be used to facilitate this kind of negotiation and cooperation. It is an interesting aspect of game design, this whole negotiation aspect, because it's often said about game design that when players come to the table, they know that the game is temporarily limited, right? So there will be a winner at the end. And in real world, this is not the case. There is no end to, the post-Cold War, power struggle. There is no sense in which the United States has won or lost. So the game is essentially open-ended, whereas on the table, it's a fixed ending game with a fairly fixed sense of calculating who's got points and who doesn't. So and this makes designing this kind of negotiation space is very difficult, because players will always be tempted to naturally to calculate, does this really make sense to me in the light of this, and this? So negotiations are very difficult in games. Often they come down also to the dynamics in the group. Some groups are very talkative. They are interested in deal making. They're finding it fun, and then others are more naturally suspicious, and they're like, I don't know, I don't really see through the math here, so I'm not doing anything, And so these kind of things always will affect how games like this play. But there is certainly an attempt here through the legacy points and other aspects to open up the possibility. Whether the players will take that opportunity to negotiate is a different matter, but that's the attempt.
Yeah, and we got sidetracked there a little bit because you said it's very easy. You're moving the counters up the track there mechanically.
Yes, indeed. Yes. So yes, I was saying that mechanically. So the original question I believe from you was like how to sort of what is the complexity and the representing
balance between
complexity
simulation and game, and how did you strike that?
Indeed. So I've tried to tie everything in what is essentially area influence mechanics. So put a card on the table, move a piece up on the track. This is the very basic mechanism that you use to, whether it's to move the influence pieces or whether it's indeed to reduce or increase tensions. This is the kind of thing that you do, and so that's the mechanical basis, and you use the same mechanic across different domains and contexts. And so that's my way of, or it has been my approach of trying to sort of limit sprawl, right? The mechanical complexity. There shouldn't be, ideally at least, a different mechanism for different contexts, but there should rather be one base mechanic that you use in different contexts to do two different things. And that has been my approach here, to trying to keep the complexity within bounds.
Yeah. And so ultimately, like, what do you hope players take away from this game? Like, what do you want them to learn or experience?
Yeah, I think so it goes back really to the thing we were talking about right at the beginning, which is this idea of order and opportunity, right? That on one hand, yeah, there's this idea of rules-based order, and you're maintaining it. You are trying to, keep a world a fair and a rule-governed place, as it were. And on the other hand, especially when you're engaging with world events that have certain negative consequences if they are not addressed and resolved in timely fashion, then you're under pressure to do something. At the same time, when you start doing it, you will inevitably face consequences, such as declining world order status and that sort of thing. So it's really that trade-off as a sort of essential aspect of the post-Cold War period that I sort of want the game to convey and people to really be in the shoes of, be it Tony Blair or George W. Bush or some of the European leaders of the period, of how do I deal with that idea of order on the one hand, and then the opportunism, the opportunities around the world to make a legacy, to score victory points, to resolve crises, or suffer the consequences of not doing so. It's really that trade-off that I think I want to foreground here.
No, this game seems really, really interesting. I really like the unique take that it is to not only bringing it to a more modern context, which is a bit unique. We're seeing a few titles like that, but it's really bringing a unique perspective. I think that there's some really, really great stuff going on here. And I know
Thanks.
it's
Yeah.
been a long process for you, what, 4, 5, 6 years, but at least the finish line or whatever is in sight for you, which
It's
it must
somewhere
be
there.
exciting. Now, have you even started on your next title, or are you just kind of finishing
Yeah.
this one off?
Yeah, sort of finishing this one up. So I've tried to, focus on this one. Just like Volko says, games are never really finished; they're only published. So certainly you could keep working on these things forever. But so trying to really focus energy here. At the same time, I think every designer, and whether published or not, has plenty of different projects in the drawer. So I could talk about those, but. I think one big takeaway from this project is it's very difficult to do 4-player games.
Yes.
I mean, on one hand, the balancing and the whole mechanical aspect of it, but the other thing is getting to test them. Right.
Yeah.
So we are doing this on a hobby basis, and finding people, usually from around the globe, finding the time that matches, that everyone's
Yes.
around at the same time online, and not only once, but ideally over multiple sessions. This is a difficulty that should not be underestimated. If you are an aspiring designer and you want to design a game, think carefully about the player count. I found that already with All Bridges Burning, which is a 3-player game, it was a
Yeah.
lot easier to get people together than with 4. So I think the next games I'm interested in doing would be 2-player, possibly even 1-player solo games.
Yeah.
I certainly have a soft spot for solo games as well. That's how I
Yeah.
kind of grew up as a gamer.
Yeah. It's kind of a shame in a way, but it's been a long-standing problem in the hobby, the historical gaming hobby, wargaming hobby, where finding opponents has been the major stumbling block for a lot of not only designers but players as well. To pull together a group of 4 to play a game that it's actually it doesn't. I would just my impression of it is that it's more medium weight. It's not super advanced. I think there's a lot of interactions that are kind of make it more the decision space more complicated, but the game itself is fairly straightforward. But just pulling together three more like-minded people to play a game and get the
For
full
sure.
experience, right? Which is, so that's why we have to get out there and promote our hobby as best we can and get as many people excited about it as possible. So
Yeah,
um,
yeah. Thanks a lot for the opportunity to talk about the game here
yeah, no,
today.
it's been great to meet you, and it's always good to hear people's perspectives, designers, and how their approach, and also just to get a sense of the passion behind the project as well, because I
Sure.
can tell you're absolutely fired up about this game, and I can see why. I think there's some really great stuff going on, so I'm really looking forward to seeing it in as a published, completed game. I'm sure
Yeah,
you.
yeah. Me too. Thanks. Yeah, yeah, it's great to hear that the passion shines through. I mean, I think like anyone working on these things as a hobby, it's probably true of everyone that they are there with their heart
Yes.
and blood and
Yes.
sweat in the game. So that's for sure.
Yes, that's great. Well, thank you so much for taking the time, Vess. It's been wonderful to connect with you, and I'm looking forward to a future conversation, maybe a playthrough or something